I drowned on April 15, 1912, but I didn't die that night. Not really, because 70 years later, I would be born again, and I would remember everything. The screams, the cold, the moment the water filled my lungs. My name was Thomas Whitmore. I was 23 years old, and I died on the Titanic. This is my story, the story of how I remembered, and how that memory has haunted me for the past 42 years. My name is David Chen. I'm 42 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm a software engineer. I have a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a Honda Civic. I'm about as ordinary as they come. But there's nothing ordinary about what happened to me when I was 7 years old. It was the summer of 1989. My parents had taken me to the beach for the first time, Cannon Beach, Oregon. I remember the excitement, the smell of salt and sunscreen, the feel of sand between my toes. And then, I saw the ocean. I stopped walking. My mother said I went completely pale. She thought I was going to faint. My father grabbed my arm, asking what was wrong. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move, because I knew that water. I had been in that water before. Not here, not on this beach, but somewhere else, somewhere dark. Somewhere cold, somewhere where the water wasn't just water, it was death. I started screaming. My parents rushed me back to the hotel. They thought I'd had a panic attack. They made an appointment with a child psychologist, Dr. Margaret Hoffman. I still remember her office, books everywhere, a leather couch that smelled like old paper, and a clock that ticked so loudly it filled every silence. She asked me what I was afraid of. I told her. I drowned. She smiled. That patient, understanding smile adults give children when they think they're being dramatic. But David, you're here with me. You didn't drown. You're safe. I shook my head. Not now. Before. Before when? Before I was David. Dr. Hoffman started asking more questions. At first, she treated it like a game, asking me to describe this before. She probably thought I'd seen a movie, or had a nightmare, or was mixing up reality with something I'd imagined. But the things I told her, they weren't from a movie. I described a ship, a massive ship. I told her about the carpets, red and gold, with patterns that looked like flowers. I described the grand staircase, with a clock at the top. I talked about the smell of coal and machinery, the sound of the engines rumbling deep below deck. I told her my name was Thomas Whitmore. I was 23. I worked in the engine room, third-class steward, and I told her about the night the ship sank. Dr. Hoffman started taking notes. Real notes. She stopped smiling. After our third session, she asked my parents if she could try something, regression therapy. Not hypnosis exactly, but a technique to help me access these memories more clearly. My parents were skeptical, but I was having nightmares every night. Waking up gasping, convinced I was drowning. They agreed to try anything. The first regression session was intense. Dr. Hoffman had me lie down, close my eyes, and focus on my breathing. She asked me to think about the water, to go back to that moment when I saw the ocean at the beach. And then, I wasn't in her office anymore. I was in the engine room of the RMS Titanic. In that session, and in the many that followed over the next 2 years, I remembered Thomas Whitmore's life with a clarity that shouldn't have been possible. Not for a 7-year-old. Not for anyone who hadn't actually lived it. Thomas was born in Southampton, England, in 1889. His father was a dock worker. His mother took in laundry to make ends meet. Thomas was the second of 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls. Money was always tight, but there was love. There was always love. He started working at 14, loading cargo on ships. By 20, he'd worked his way up to a position with the White Star Line. When the Titanic was being prepared for its maiden voyage, Thomas was offered a position as a third-class steward. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. I remember, Thomas remembered, the morning of April 10, 1912. Departure day. Southampton was alive with energy. Thousands of people crowded the docks. The Titanic loomed above everything else, impossibly large, impossibly grand. Thomas stood on the dock with his younger brother, William, who was 16 and desperately jealous. "You lucky bastard," William said, grinning. You'll be in America in a week. Living the dream. Thomas punched him lightly on the shoulder. I'll send for you. Once I've saved enough. We'll both make it to America. I promise. They hugged. Thomas grabbed his bag, everything he owned in the world, and walked up the gangway. He never saw William again. The first few days on the Titanic were a blur of work. Thomas was assigned to the third-class sections, the lower decks, where immigrants from all over Europe were packed together, heading for new lives in America. Despite the cramped conditions, there was hope down there. Thomas heard dozens of languages, smelled unfamiliar foods, watched children play games he didn't recognize. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a dream. Thomas's job was simple. Help the passengers, keep order, make sure everything ran smoothly. He worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping, but he didn't mind. He was on the grandest ship ever built, crossing the Atlantic Ocean. He felt like he was part of history. I remember, Thomas remembered, standing on the deck on the evening of April 14th. His shift had ended. He'd come up for air, to clear his head. The ocean was eerily calm. Flat as glass. The sky was clear, stars everywhere, brighter than he'd ever seen them. It was beautiful, peaceful. Thomas thought about America, about the life waiting for him there. He thought about saving money, sending for William, maybe meeting a girl, starting a family. He thought he had his whole life ahead of him. He had 4 hours left. Thomas went back below deck at 11:30 p.m. His bunk was in the crew quarters, a small room he shared with 5 other men. He was exhausted. He lay down, still in his work clothes, and closed his eyes. He'd just started to drift off when he felt it. A vibration, a shudder running through the entire ship. Like the Titanic had driven over something. It lasted maybe 5, 6 seconds. Then, nothing. Thomas sat up. Around him, the other men were stirring, confused. What was that? Someone asked. Probably nothing, another voice said. Go back to sleep. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He got up, pulled on his coat, and headed up to the deck. When he emerged onto the third-class promenade, he saw chunks of ice scattered across the deck. Some of the passengers were awake, picking up pieces, laughing, throwing them at each other like snowballs. Thomas walked further forward. He found one of the senior stewards, a man named Peterson. What happened? Thomas asked. Peterson's face was grim. We hit an iceberg. Captains ordered all crew to stations. We're assessing the damage now. Is it serious? Peterson didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. Start waking the passengers. Tell them to put on warm clothes and life jackets. Don't cause a panic, but make sure they're ready. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Ready for what? Just do it, Whitmore. For the next 30 minutes, Thomas moved through the third-class sections, knocking on doors, waking families. Most people were annoyed. Some refused to leave their cabins. Others didn't understand English and looked at him in confusion. Please, Thomas kept saying. It's just a precaution. Put on your life jackets and come to the deck. But deep down, even then, he knew. This wasn't a precaution. By 12:30 a.m., the reality was setting in. The ship was tilting. Not much, but enough to notice. Water was flooding the lower decks. The mailroom, the cargo holds, the squash courts, rising, inch by inch. Thomas helped families up the narrow staircases. He carried children. He held the hands of elderly passengers who couldn't move quickly. The corridors were packed. Everyone was trying to get to the upper decks at once. And then they hit the gates. The third-class sections were separated from first and second class by locked gates. It was meant to keep people in their designated areas, to prevent immigrants from wandering into the luxury sections. Now, those gates were death traps. Hundreds of people were pressed against the metal barriers, shouting, begging to be let through. Thomas and other crew members tried to unlock them, but they didn't have all the keys. Some gates wouldn't budge. The chaos was overwhelming. Please. A woman screamed in Italian, holding a baby. Please, let us through. Thomas grabbed the gate and shook it, trying to force it open. His hands were bleeding. Other men joined him. They rammed their shoulders against the metal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the gate gave way. People poured through, stampeding toward the upper decks. Thomas helped as many as he could. But there were too many. Too many people, not enough time. By 1:15 a.m., Thomas made it to the boat deck. The scene there was surreal. Lifeboats were being lowered, half empty. Officers were shouting, women and children only. Families were being torn apart. Men were saying goodbye to their wives and daughters, knowing they'd never see them again. Thomas watched a lifeboat with maybe 20 people in it, capacity for 65, being lowered into the water. He couldn't understand it. Why weren't they filling them? Why were they leaving people behind? We need more people in that boat. Thomas shouted at an officer. Stand back, the officer barked. We're doing what we can. But they weren't. Not really. There was confusion. Disorganization. Some officers thought the lifeboats would break if they were fully loaded. Others were following the women and children first rule so strictly that they were launching boats with empty seats rather than let men board. It was chaos, and the Titanic was sinking faster now. The bow was dipping lower. The stern was rising. The deck was slanting at a noticeable angle. Thomas realized he wasn't getting off this ship. At 1:45 a.m., Thomas stopped trying to get on a lifeboat. There weren't enough. There had never been enough. The Titanic carried lifeboats for 1,178 people. There were over 2,200 on board. The math was simple, horrifying, but simple. Most of them were going to die. Thomas made a decision. If he was going to die, he was going to die helping others. He went back below deck, into the sections that were already flooding, looking for anyone who might still be trapped. The water was up to his knees now. It was freezing, so cold it took his breath away. He waded through corridors, calling out, listening for responses. He found a young girl, maybe 5 years old, standing in water up to her waist, crying. Her mother was unconscious nearby, having hit her head when the ship tilted. Thomas grabbed them both, carrying the mother over his shoulder and the girl in his arms, and fought his way back up the stairs. He delivered them to the boat deck. An officer took the girl. The mother was starting to wake up. Thomas turned to go back down. Where are you going? The mother asked, grabbing his arm. She had an Irish accent. Her eyes were wide with fear. There might be others, Thomas said. You'll die down there. Thomas smiled, a sad, resigned smile. We're all going to die, ma'am. Might as well make it count for something. He went back down 3 more times. Each time, the water was higher. Each time, the ship groaned louder, tilting further. He found a man with a broken leg. A teenager who'd gotten lost. An elderly couple holding hands, refusing to leave each other. Thomas helped them all. Some made it to lifeboats. Some didn't, but he tried. God, he tried. By 2 a.m., the bow was almost completely submerged. The stern was rising higher and higher. People who'd been holding onto the deck were sliding into the water. Others were jumping, trying to get clear of the ship before it pulled them under. Thomas stood near the stern. There was nowhere left to go. The lifeboats were gone. The ship was breaking apart. Around him, people were praying, singing hymns, holding each other. The band, the ship's orchestra, was still playing. Thomas could hear them, even over the screams. Nearer, my God, to thee. It was the most hauntingly beautiful thing he'd ever heard. Thomas thought about his family. His mother, his father, William, his sisters. He thought about Southampton, about the docks where he'd worked, about the smell of his mother's cooking. He thought about all the things he'd never do, never see, never experience. He was 23 years old. He was supposed to have a whole life ahead of him. At 2:18 a.m., the lights went out. The ship's electrical system failed. Everything went black. The only light came from the stars above. And then, the Titanic split in half. The sound was indescribable. Metal tearing, rivets popping, the entire structure of the ship ripping apart. Thomas felt the deck lurch beneath him. He lost his balance, sliding down the tilting surface. The stern section, where Thomas was, briefly settled back, almost level, floating on its own. For a few seconds, there was an eerie calm. And then the stern began to sink. Fast, so fast. Thomas didn't have time to think. The deck was vertical now. He was clinging to a railing, his feet dangling above the water. People around him were falling, screaming, disappearing into the darkness below. He couldn't hold on anymore. Thomas let go. The fall felt like it lasted forever. Thomas hit the water hard. The cold was. There are no words. It wasn't just cold, it was pain. Instant, overwhelming, all-consuming pain. The water was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Below freezing, kept liquid only by the salt. Thomas gasped, sucking in air and water. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His body went into shock immediately. His muscles seized up. He tried to swim, but his arms and legs wouldn't respond. He surfaced, choking, coughing. Around him, the ocean was filled with hundreds of people. All of them screaming, crying, calling out names. Help me, please. Oh God, Mary, John, Mother. The sound. I can't describe the sound. Even now, 83 years later, as David, lying in bed at night, I can still hear it. That chorus of dying people. It's burned into my soul. Thomas tried to find something to hold onto. A piece of debris, a deck chair, anything. But there was too much chaos. Too many people thrashing in the water. He was hit in the head by a piece of wood. Kicked by someone trying to climb over him to stay afloat. The stern section was sinking now, going down fast. It created a current, pulling people under. Thomas felt it, that terrible suction. He fought against it, kicking with what little strength he had left, but his body was shutting down. Hypothermia was setting in. His thoughts were becoming fuzzy. Slow. He stopped fighting. Thomas floated there, in the freezing water, looking up at the stars. They were so bright, so beautiful. He focused on them, trying to ignore the screams around him, trying to ignore the cold that was no longer painful but oddly warm, peaceful even. His body was giving up, shutting down system by system. He thought about his mother one last time. Wondered if she'd ever know what happened to him. Wondered if anyone would remember him at all. And then, the water took him. Thomas Whitmore sank beneath the surface. He held his breath for as long as he could. 10 seconds, 20, 30. His lungs burned. His vision was getting dark at the edges. Finally, his body forced him to breathe. Water rushed in, into his lungs, into his throat, burning, choking. He tried to cough it out but only drew in more. This was drowning. This was death. His last thought was, "I'm sorry, William. I'm so sorry." And then, nothing. David, woke up screaming in Dr. Hoffman's office. I was 7 years old, lying on her couch, clutching my throat, convinced I was drowning. She rushed over, holding my shoulders, telling me I was safe, I was breathing, I was okay. But I wasn't okay. I had just died. Over the next several months, Dr. Hoffman and I had many more sessions. She recorded everything I said. She took notes on every detail I could remember about Thomas's life, about the Titanic, about that night. And then she did something I didn't understand at the time. She started researching. She went to libraries. She contacted historians. She found passenger manifests, crew lists, survivor testimonies. She was looking for proof. Verification that the things I was saying, the things Thomas remembered, were real. What she found changed everything. Thomas Whitmore existed. He was listed on the Titanic's crew manifest. Third-class steward, 23 years old, from Southampton. He died when the ship sank. His body was never recovered. But that wasn't all. The details I'd described, things a 7-year-old in 1989 couldn't possibly have known, were accurate. The layout of the third-class sections. The locked gates. The colors of the carpets. The clock on the grand staircase. The way the ship broke in half. That last one was particularly significant. You see, in 1989, when I was describing the Titanic splitting in two, most historians still believed the ship had sunk intact. It wasn't until 1985 that the wreck was discovered, and even then, there was debate about whether it had split. I described the split, exactly how it happened, where it happened, the sound it made. I described things that wouldn't be officially confirmed until years later. Dr. Hoffman published a paper about my case. It caused a small stir in past life regression circles, but most mainstream scientists dismissed it. False memories, they said. Information I'd absorbed somehow and reconstructed into a narrative. The human mind is powerful, they argued. It can create incredibly detailed false experiences. Maybe they're right, I don't know. But I remember drowning. I remember the cold. I remember Thomas's life as clearly as I remember my own childhood. And I've spent the last 35 years trying to understand what that means. Growing up with Thomas's memories wasn't easy. Through elementary school, middle school, high school, I was the weird kid who claimed he'd died on the Titanic. You can imagine how that went over. I learned quickly to keep it to myself. To not talk about Thomas. To pretend the memories were just bad dreams that had faded away. But they never faded. I developed a phobia of water. Not drinking water, but bodies of water. Oceans, lakes, even swimming pools made me anxious. The feeling of being submerged, of water closing over my head, it brought everything back. The cold, the panic, the drowning. I've never been on a boat. Never gone on a cruise. My wife wanted to take a trip to Hawaii for our honeymoon. I couldn't do it. We drove to Colorado instead. She knows about Thomas. I told her on our third date, figuring it was better to get it out in the way early. To my surprise, she didn't run away screaming. She listened. She asked questions. She even came with me to visit Dr. Hoffman once, just to understand better. My wife believes me, or at least, she believes that I believe it. And that's enough. In 1997, James Cameron's film, Titanic, came out. Everyone I knew was obsessed with it. They wanted me to go see it with them. I refused. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I went alone, to a late-night showing where the theater was almost empty. Watching that film was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Seeing the ship, the grand staircase, the engine room, the third-class sections, exactly as I remembered them. Seeing the locked gates, the chaos, the lifeboats being lowered half-empty, and the ending, when the ship split in two, when hundreds of people were thrown into the freezing water. I left the theater before the credits rolled. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried. Not sad tears. Not really. It was relief? Validation? I don't know. Someone had shown the world what I'd always known. What I'd remembered. The truth of what happened that night. In 2012, on the 100th anniversary of the sinking, I did something I'd never done before. I went to a memorial service. It was in Seattle, at a maritime museum. They read out the names of all 1,517 people who died. When they said, Thomas Whitmore, I felt something break inside me. A weight I'd been carrying for decades, for a lifetime, lifted just a little bit. Someone remembered him. After 100 years, someone said his name out loud. He wasn't forgotten. I'm 42 now. Thomas died at 23. I've lived almost twice as long as he did. I've had experiences he never got to have. I went to college. I fell in love. I got married. I watched my children be born. I've traveled, laughed, cried, lived. All the things Thomas should have done. Sometimes I wonder, if this is real, if reincarnation is real, if I really am Thomas living again, why'd I remember? Most people don't. Most people live their whole lives without any memory of what came before. Why me? Dr. Hoffman had a theory. She thought traumatic deaths, sudden, violent, frightening deaths, sometimes leave an imprint strong enough to carry over to the next life. Like an echo that never quite fades. Maybe she was right, or maybe it's random. Maybe I'm just one of the unlucky ones who can't forget. But here's what I've learned, living with Thomas's memory. Death is real. It's final. It's terrifying. Thomas died cold, scared, and alone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That's not a metaphor. That's not a story. That's what happened. But life is also real. And precious. And worth living fully. Thomas never got to see America. Never got to send for his brother. Never got to fall in love, start a family, grow old. I get to do all of that. And maybe, just maybe, I'm doing it for both of us. 2 years ago, I finally did something I'd been avoiding my entire life. I went to the ocean. My wife and I took our kids to the coast. The same beach where it all started, Cannon Beach, Oregon. We walked down to the water's edge. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. But I kept walking. The water touched my feet. It was cold, but not the cold I remembered. Not the deadly, killing cold of the North Atlantic. Just ocean water. In summer. 55 degrees, maybe. I stood there, letting the waves wash over my feet, and I said something out loud. Something I'd needed to say for 33 years. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. My wife squeezed my hand. Who are you talking to? Everyone, I said. Everyone who died that night. I don't know if past lives are real. I don't know if I really was Thomas Whitmore, or if my mind somehow created this elaborate false memory. I don't know if there's life after death, or reincarnation, or if we all just end. But I know this. On April 15, 1912, 1,517 people died in the North Atlantic Ocean. They were real people, with real lives, real families, real dreams. Thomas Whitmore was one of them. And whether I'm remembering his life or honoring his memory, I'm making sure he's not forgotten. None of them should be forgotten. The water remembers, and so do I.